Arisa, you can hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay. So we're trying something new. I'm going to run the audio through that. So that way the recording, the Zoom recording also has the audio of the videos. I've got 2 or 3 videos I'm going to be showing. So having the video work is going to be kind of important. Wait, design aesthetics. So we're going to be talking about design aesthetics this week. Does anybody know what I might mean by design aesthetics? Yes. So user friendliness and the look are intertwined, but not the same. So we are going to focus on how it looks. What is it evoking through the experience versus the usability of the experience just yet. We'll focus on usability next week. So, this week we're going to be focusing on how we can look through the lens of what makes things beautiful, what makes things have a reaction to how they are designed. These all have key aspects of what we then focus on in heuristics. So, pop quiz. What is the difference between a pigeon and a dove? Yes. Anything else different? The plumage. Anything else? Yes. You do see a lot more pigeons than doves because doves are more rare, but are they different? Yes. Rats with wings. Exactly. So you are all correct. There is literally no difference between a dove and a pigeon other than its plumage and how we perceive it, which is why nobody here has bought pigeon chocolate. When was the last time you washed yourselves down with pigeon soap? It's just the name. Why won't that work? Why does Dove soap work better? Why do doves released for a wedding work versus pigeons? Why would that be? Yes. There is a social construct attached. So in Judeo-Christian culture, the doves were released from Noah after the floods to find land. Doves being white demonstrated, being all white plumage demonstrated purity. Renewal is how they were attached for the story of Noah, and those things stuck. That's essentially how brand works. We attach what we have as norms and understandings to a thing because of its consistency and repetitiveness, and therefore it evokes those things at not just a recognizable level, but at an emotional level. Yes, hands raised. Arisa.
Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
It kind of reminded me of when, let's say, for example, I'm an iPhone user, so it kind of reminds me of like the iPhone versus Android and how my perception of an iPhone is like a dove versus the latter.
So you're exactly right. It's not only that, but as an iPhone user, you're essentially demonstrating what your socioeconomic class is. And so there's that attachment to it. You're exactly right. We'll go into actually some more things about specifically Apple and the brand in a little bit. Does anybody know this place? Disneyland, right? Okay. What do they call Disneyland? The happiest place on earth. It's like ingrained. Now, mind you, most of you have likely not seen a television commercial in probably a good 5 years. And yet we all know it's the happiest place on earth because it's what they're selling. That's the brand. So I used to live in Southern California, and I used to, when I was a teenager, I was a summer camp counselor. And so what we would do is during the day, we would have the kids and we would take them through the park, and then us counselors would come back later that night. And I was a summer camp counselor for like 3 or 4 years in a row. So I used to detest how sterile it felt at Disneyland. So one of the things that I would do when I was hanging out with my friends is I'd purposely dump over my soda and fries after I was done eating, just to count how long it would take before somebody cleaned it up. And I would just go to a different bench and I would time it. And I did it twice because I was an awful teenager. The longest was 3 minutes. Why? Because they're defending their brand for every fry that's left on the ground. So that's why there's an expectation that when I take my kids there, they will enjoy themselves, that it'll be safe, and it will be a place that is conducive to children and families. And they will be happy because it's the happiest place on earth. These things are all intertwined with not just their message and how they represent themselves, but that perception becomes what they are about. Make sense? So these two devices were released at the same time. The Wolverine on your right had a replaceable battery, and it came with extra batteries that you could then charge in a charger. It had replaceable memory cards, so I could take the card and have as much memory as I wanted on it. It played 40 different file types versus the iPhone, or sorry, the iPod at the time only did 3. The iPod broke really easily. The iPod did not have replaceable batteries or replaceable memory. Whatever you bought, and at this time it was probably 16 megabytes, it didn't go over 16 megabytes. Yet, the Wolverine failed. Why? It's ugly. What does it say to you when you look at it? What's the experience going to be like? It's confusing. It's going to be hard to use because of how it looks. The aesthetic is how we're able to then devise what we need to understand that's deeper than the aesthetic. So effective design is about its aesthetic pleasure, practical needs, and the emotional benefits that come from that. So this is really interesting book. You all have extra time to relax after this class during your Christmas break. This is a good one, The Aesthetic Brain. And what it talks about is how we have evolved into our expectations of what we consider aesthetic. And the way that they describe it is based on evolution, so that we have these highly enhanced perception skills out of evolution that are no longer needed to keep us alive. Yet we still have them. And so they're applied in a different way with these highly evolved perception skills. So I'll give you a couple examples. What are the words that you would put associated with this picture? Sorry? Relaxing. What about a sunset? Okay, but what about vacation? Live. What do you mean?
This is the life you want to be.
Ah, ideal. Ideal life. And when I was asking about the sunset and the skyline, what are the feelings that those evoke? They're calming. Now, why do you think that it is anywhere in the world, if I have a view like this, my real estate is worth more? Why do you think that is? Because it's nicer, right? Well, why is that a universal thought? Why is it wherever I have a vista, whether it's a mountaintop view or a view of the ocean, why do we all have the same universal thought? And according to this book, the reason why is because from that vantage point, I can see a predator from far away. And since I don't see a predator, I feel safe. So it is evolved into our psychology for identifying things that make us feel safe. Therefore, this is more ideal. So they tested this theory, and you're about to see the video of the person who studied it. Now, the doctor that did this he does this little, he makes the sound of this bird. It is just absolutely adorable. It makes me giggle every time. So we're going to get to that. So what you're seeing here are two birds. They're the same bird. One is the domesticated version in Japan. The other is the wild version, the Bengalese finch. The Bengalese finch is the one on the, the white-rumped munia is the one on, I'm trying to remember. I get them mixed up every time. The fat one, the fat fluffy white one. The fat fluffy white one, that one is the domesticated version. The wild one, the one that's found in the wild, is the brown one. Which one, I'm asking you, has the more sophisticated song? The domesticated one? Who thinks the domesticated one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so a third. The rest of you believe that the wild finch will have a more sophisticated song. Okay, let's go test that.
Thank you, organizers, for this,
hear okay?
this opportunity. So, okay, I'm talking about birds, but I believe birds are closer to humans than chimpanzees. Okay? This is white-rumped munia. This bird has white rump here. And this is a Bengalese finch. You see, you already see this white pigmentation, the patchy pattern. Okay? These guys are the same species. So through this comparative study, I would like to suggest that evolution of sound complexity in finches might mirror evolution of language in humans. I will do this first by taking this Tinbergen's 4-question strategies. The first question is about evolution. What happened to the sound when wild finch is domesticated? And what happened with evolution of complexity? Let's see this again. Okay, this is a wild animal, white-rumped munia. This is a domesticated version of that, Bengalese finch. Very white patchy, and looks like really domesticated. I don't know what. It looks like very wild and very domesticated. Too big. Now, they have been domesticated for 250 years for for reproductive behavior. Actually, they were imported from China to Japan exactly 250 years ago. And since they mature in 3 months or so, there are about 500 generations since then. And morphology changed, I mean pigmentation, plumage changed as you saw in the photo. But no record describing artificial selection for songs, and many records on selection for reproductive efficiency and white color morph. But nevertheless, songs changed very radically. So, this is a sonogram of Bengalese finch song. This is domesticated version of this white rump tumunia. You see this is time and frequency, and let's hear how does it sound like. Quite complicated. Now, let's hear the white rumped Munir song. Okay.
Adorable.
You see here, looks like complicated, but actually it's repetition of same sequences like this. Here, looks like complicated, and it's really complicated. When I make a transition diagram, Bengalese finch song is like this. It's really complicated with many loops and many going back arrows like this. And white rump tumunia song is basically simple linear repetition. Okay.
Okay. So those that chose the domestic, you're right. Why would that be? Yeah, Jacob.
Yes, but I think probably once in a while, we're more sophisticated because they needed to be, like, to activate.
Well, the domesticated were not as sophisticated.
Yeah, the ones in.
Oh, sorry, the wild ones were not as sophisticated.
Oh, really?
Yes,
I thought the,
the white rump munia is the wild version. The Bengalese finch is the domesticated version. Why would that be? Yes. So the sophistication that was used was what are the different types of songs that it will sing, and how complicated are those songs? Are there a large variety, and are they complicated? Now, what this study found was that though the wild one, the white rump munia, had sophistication in its songs, they were highly repetitive. And meanwhile, the songs that the domesticated one were significantly more complicated. And the reason why is because a bird in the wild has essentially 3 things to say. I'm ready to get it on. Here I am. Trouble here. That's it. Those are the 3 things of why it communicates to survive, are those 3 things. Well, what happens when you have this very sophisticated superpower of communication, but you no longer need it for just those 3 things because you're in a cage, and outside of somebody who leaves your cage open with a cat in the house, you're safe. Which means that that same skill set can be used without impedance and can be used for a variety of things. And that variety can grow because the skill set is there. It's no longer necessary to be refined for what it was originally for. Make sense? We have the same thing built into us. Okay. And this works for how we consider neuroaesthetics. So the way you want to look at this is that at first, our job in the wild of the savannah was to assure that we weren't going to get eaten. And the way we were able to identify that was by understanding patterns. We're going to go into these patterns a little bit later about what exactly we identify in the patterns. But the idea here is that if we see an anomaly, we recognize the anomaly. If we see a pattern that is something we can then can avoid without worrying about, well, then that becomes part of how we adapt. Our ability to adopt is the only reason why you are all here wearing clothes and having glasses and driving cars. Because all of these forms of adaptation are because we're able to understand patterns. And those patterns allow us to be able to use those skills of pattern identification for other things, since none of us have to worry on an hourly basis whether we're going to get eaten by a bear. So because of that, that skill set is still there, but it's no longer needed for the same purpose, even though it is nascent in all of us. So what you're going to see is a MRI of a person's brain as they're listening to the tango. Now, does anybody ever heard the tango before? It's that really, okay, there we go, excellent. So it's a very dramatic music. It's the one you see where they have the rose in their mouth and the big giant dramatic dips while they're dancing together. That's the tango. It has lots of dramatic moments in the music because it's telling a haunting, sometimes dramatic love story in some way, shape, or form as part of its music. So there's lots of sudden starts, there's lots of melodic parts, but it doesn't always fit together at first or in the end or in the middle. It just kind of jumps around, but it pulls you in because there are patterns in it that it kind of seeds, that it then grows into the crescendo of the music. So listening to the music requires you to be able to identify those patterns. So what you're going to see is the brain as it is being stimulated by the music. And so every single time you see the colors of the brain change from green, or I guess it's a light blue, is because that's when a part of the brain is stimulated. And the red means it's new fires, and the other ones are a little lower in firing. Okay, so let's go into it and so you can see. I'm not going to jump around a little bit because it's a little long. Where did my music go? Oh, there it is. So far, nothing's making sense. So different parts of the brain are like, what the heck is this? What's going on? No aesthetics here, right? Just noise. Now, all of a sudden, there's a melody. Now, all of a sudden, lots of parts of the brain are being stimulated. Okay. So, wait, I just went a little too fast, but okay. So what you saw was the fact that the drama in the song triggered all kinds of parts in the brain, memories, melodic tunes that it could associate with, the repetition of the tune, the drama in the song itself, the beauty of its simplicity, the fact that it led to something. All these things triggered in the brain additional stimuli that you didn't see at the beginning of the tango song. That's because the aesthetic is partly a matter of how we are enticed into what we hear and what we see. It's that engagement, that is the aesthetic. That our brain is used for a pattern recognition tool to save us in the wild. Now it can be used for, like the Bengalese finch, appreciate it for different things. Any questions so far? Makes sense. It's all about patterns. So that is why you can all read what this says. It's missing about 20% of what is necessary to understand that information, but we all understand the patterns of what it's saying instead. So here's the thing. Brands I know this about you, and they make you fill that in. So that way, when you see the Disney logo with the castle, you automatically think happiest place on earth. You're filling in that gap, that pattern hole. So let's do a test. Oops, I jumped too ahead. Damn it. All right, so now you know what you're gonna do. I want you to tell me what the logo, what is this brand? So you already saw. Okay, I'm gonna time you on the next one. You ready? Okay. From the girl who's getting married. If you didn't catch that, she said, Tiffany, within a half a second, guess who's getting married? Now, a friend of mine, I sat in as a visitor for the class, and not getting married, thought this might be the Windows logo. Yes, half a second. Okay, let's try one more. Okay, that was about half a second. Why? Why was it that easy? Sorry? It's common. Oh, the color. That's part of it. What else? I'm sorry, the what value? The recall value is very strong. Yes. Yes, you see it millions of times. So I went 2 days ago to Target with my daughter, and I counted how many times I saw a logo. 6 times on my entry into the parking lot. Another 28 times when I entered the doors. And then from there, there's logos on the labels, there's logos on the walls, there's logos on the people's badges, there's logos on the receipt, there's logos on the carts, etc., etc., etc. The reason why that pattern recognition is there is because it is in your face like a machine gun. And because your brain is identifying patterns as part of its way of surviving, you're being trained to fill in the gaps of what target means. So the more and more you are repeating those patterns, the more you will appreciate it for what it is that it's trying to communicate to you. There's a reason for this. Oh, it was the bus. The bus was mad because the guy turned in front of him. There's a reason why the split-second recognition is so important. So this is another study. Again, in your wee hours of being bored during Christmas break, you have another book you can try out. This one is Sources of Power, How People Make Decisions by Gary Klein. Now, this one has a theory about naturalistic decision-making. How we make decisions in split seconds, how that works, why. So, the theory in this book was that faced with a problem, a person gathers information, identifies the possible solutions, and chooses the best one. What Gary Klein went out to do was to figure out how you do it so fast based on those decisions that you have to make. So he and his team followed firemen, emergency EMT workers in ambulances, police officers, etc. And he followed them to figure out how this process worked based on this assumption. They were wrong. It turned out that's not what they do. So what he would do is follow them, the firemen afterward, and say, well, how did you end up coming up with the plan? And he's like, I thought of the first thing came to my head. I did a little checklist to see would I die? And if the answer was probably not, then I did it. So it was not the best idea. It was the first idea. And whether or not that first idea was viable. That eliminated lots of critical time in making decisions. We're designed for that. So this plays its way out because we form our decisions based on patterns as the way we define experience. Those patterns are how we have survived. So think about it. Joe and Mikey, 45,000 years ago, are in the savannah. Joe and Mikey see rustling in the bushes. Joe says, I wonder what that is. He looks over at Mikey, Mikey's gone. Joe's now food. Mikey ran away. So Joe, wanting to hem and haw, think about it, thought it was kind of interesting to see brushes. Joe's not passing on his DNA. Mikey, hightailing out of there, he's passing on his DNA. It's that simple, that the fact that our ability to make optimized, quick, pattern-based decisions are being ingrained in us. And because of that ingraining, we're using it in different ways. And that's because of this recognition prime decision-making model. And it's because of how human evolution has created this as the way that we think. So what are we doing with this superpower? We're not using it to avoid cheetahs anymore. So what are we doing with it? Well, there's this idea that uses the ideas of patterns in Gestalt. Does anybody know what the whole is the sum of its parts? That's what Gestalt means in German. What that means? Any ideas? Any ideas? The whole is the sum of its parts. Yes.
We don't see everything.
And so what do we do in order to see it? We fill in the gaps for that picture. Yes. So we may have a myopic view, but based on that myopic view, we try to gather as much information as quickly as possible to assess what it is we're seeing based on those patterns. The growth of those patterns are not seen as individual things, they're seen as a system. Our brain is designed to see it as a system. That's Gestalt. So we're going to do a Mikey and Joe test here. I'm going to start zooming out, and you tell me when you can tell what this is. We have a lot of Joes. Do we have any Mikeys? Okay. I heard dog. Who else said dog? Jacob's the only Joe, or the only Mikey in the building? You got 2, 3. Yes, it's a Dalmatian. Smelling the ground. You see it now? But the only way you can do that is by not looking at it as a series of spot dots. You look at it based on depth perception of how you would look at it if you had all the information to work from. Unfortunately, many of you would be with Joe food. Sorry. But there are a few Mikeys out there that would keep the DNA going. So the idea here is that through Gestalt, we are able to associate lots of different things, put it together in our head. Now you can't get the dog out of your head, right? Y'all see it? So this is the idea of Gestalt, which is why you don't see a single image. Every single one of you sees 2 images. You see a square and a triangle, but it's not a square and a triangle. It's why the person you see to the left is convinced that she found in her cheese toast an image of Saint Mary. So that's called prognance, the ability to be able to take these associations, put it together. Our brain is designed to do that. Make sense? Any questions before we take a small break? We're good? Okay, so we'll take a quick 5-minute break. Let you stretch your legs, head to the bathroom. I'll see you in 5.
Joe and Mikey thing is so funny because I went to Ecuador and I was in the jungle and I saw a snake and it was blue and beautiful and I was like, snake? And I was like, it's so pretty.
And meanwhile, it's Blue saying, don't mess with me.
Well, I was with, she's from there. She's like, this weekend I was in, because I'm from Norway, we don't have snakes. Like we have some garden snakes and they're very, very, very few. Like in the north there are no venomous snakes. So it's a rare thing for me. But she's lived in the jungle her whole life, so she has that, you know, connotation that, you know,
Yeah, the association.
Association.
Yeah.
And this weekend I went to Eastern Washington and I heard a snake and I saw it and I ran. So it Geez, like, or maybe I would have stopped and looked at it.
Right, right.
Snakes are so fast.
That's so funny. So
That this weekend.
that's too funny. So I'm glad you came up to me because I don't know how to pronounce your name.
Mayan,
Mayan.
Mayan.
Okay, that's pretty easy to remember. Good. Thanks. How do I pause? Okay, we got tons to get through still, so I'm gonna try to get us done in an hour and a half. So it's gonna be tough. I'm gonna try. So. All this leads up to how we are perceiving brands. So we already discussed brands from the point of view of UPS and Tiffany's and Disney. Tell me how you would describe a brand. Yes, Rose. You should teach this class. You're exactly right. Your emotional association with that inanimate organization. Yes. So we're going to look at this from the point of view of people. So the way we're going to do this is based on how we look at brands for the branding of people. So here is an example of a close association with my former boss, Hunter. We'll not reveal the last name, not reveal the company, but it was a big agency. And Hunter was super talented. And they would always bring him in for our big accounts. He was the one you wanted to rely on. So the thing about Hunter was that he was German and had a very exacting manner about him. And that really helped put the clients at ease. And a lot of that of what he evoked was what the clients reacted to. So what exactly made Hunter Hunter? So first was he always used a drafting pen with draft paper to write his notes. Now, you don't need to do that. You can type on a laptop perfectly fine. You can use ruled, spiral bound ruled paper, but no, he used a drafting pen and drafting paper. And he always wore really expensive glasses. I picked up that one. So he had Armani's. I have Tom Ford. So these things were part of his aesthetic. So when he had his Germanness come out, it won him over because you didn't feel like any detail was being lost. And it wasn't just the way he talked in a very exacting way. It wasn't just in the way he dressed in a very exacting way. It wasn't just in the things he would carry with him when he would meet with a client. It was all of it. But here's the thing about Hunter. Despite having this persona of German technorati and being like a hipster and smart with precision, there was a problem. And there was this one project I was on with him where he had me doing the work and he was telling me how to be able to do it. And it was for a big bank. And what he was telling me to do didn't work. And I knew it didn't work. but he told me to do it anyway. And I played it out and it still, the logic was broken. I don't want to go into the details of what it was, but essentially for you to have an account that has interest rates that update over time because you're late, you can't do everything based on a statement, because a statement is something that happened for what you were issued in the past, as opposed to what happened now. So what happens now is the interest rate based on what you didn't pay, if you didn't pay your full amount, or if you were late. Well, all of a sudden, if you go to your website and all you see is the statement, well, actually what it's telling you is the wrong information. It needs to tell you what's happened since the statement, which means there's actually two ledgers. That logic didn't work in his head. And so I end up having to do, in secret at 2 a.m, a different version to solve for the fact that it was not grokking in his head, the fact that you needed to have this two ledger system for past and up-to-date present. Which meant that all of the goodness did not necessarily have outcome. And that kind of played out when I look at Hunter's LinkedIn. He's got about a 2.5-year life cycle before he doesn't go any further. And then he moves on to the next job. And he's kind of at a middling role now. He's been in the same place for a while. It's a very, he's had as much experience as me, if not more. And yet his career didn't really grow. And the reason why is because of this. The exacting nature was puffery. The exacting nature was not in how he would solve problems. It was how he would present problems. So even though he had all this goodness, it was applied in a role that he could not deliver on for what he was demonstrating as. Make sense? Okay. This is the great thing about being an instructor. I get to choose what axes I want to grind. So now we're going to go to a different boss. This one goes even further back in time for my very first boss when I was in college, and it was a software company I was working at. Now, Sam was the opposite. Again, not an exact likeness, but there are some similarities. So Sam, he owned the software company I worked for. I did tech support at the time and then moved on to doing, I was a junior engineer, and then I moved into software design, or software interface design, and then concept design for products. That evolution was always with Sam at the helm. Sam was a very sweet guy. Really, 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 really smart. And there were things about Sam that made Sam Sam. This was Santa Monica. He was from Australia. So one of those things was he always wore Birkenstocks, and usually with socks, which is like not the classiest thing. I always saw him behind his machine. In fact, I can't even remember how tall he was because I always saw him sitting coding in front of his computer. So whenever I would go see him, it would be going to his desk in his office in front of his computer. There's very few times I remember seeing him outside of that. And then he had this hair. It would just grow. And it wasn't until his wife would say, Sam, you really need to go get a haircut now, that it finally would go back down to a normal size. Otherwise, it would just keep going. And it was great because he had this bald spot in the middle, but then the growth would happen on the sides. It was just a marvelous thing to witness. But that was fine because we're talking Santa Monica, California. This is what you expect in the tech industry. Somebody who's earthy, somebody who's genuine, somebody who's not always just thinking about their head a little in the clouds for the future. That's what you wanted. That's what he delivered as far as his personality. But here's the thing. Sam was a very sweet guy, and he was a very smart guy. And the software we were building was nothing like it. But when we tried to pitch it as an original, to have it as a software that was included with printers and with scanners and with limits in cameras. So it was gonna be software that was gonna be included, they got for free. So these companies like Canon and Epson and all those, Sony, all those, they would, and HP, they would, we would pitch to them the software that they would then do a deal with us. It would be bundled with their hardware. And the whole idea is that if you have it, then you'll print more with your printer, you will scan more with your scanner, et cetera, because of the cool stuff that the software did. But here's the thing. He went out with his sales guy to, I think, 3 or 4 places in the Bay Area. And the first 2 were a no-hit. They didn't sign a contract. Nobody signed a contract. Mind you, they were very interested on the phone. Then the third one, I think it was with HP, right before his wife called, said his daughter was really sick. So Sam, being such a wonderful guy, he left and went home. And then they landed that deal. And then they landed the next deal. Sam was at home, sales guy was by himself. So what do we learn from this? Well, Sam, laid back, kind, computer fluent. For an acolyte like myself, all positives. For HP, wanting to sign a contract worth millions of dollars, not so much. So these things did not align as assets for what he was trying to sell. Once he took himself out of the equation, problem solved. So our brand has to align with these things. And that's because it lies at the heart of one's business. And it's the emotional connection one has. So here's some examples. Coffee is coffee, French fries are French fries, beer is beer. There's like, as long as you're staying within a certain category of beer, certain category of coffee, certain category of French fries, they're essentially the same. But we all know they're not. There are lots and lots and lots of examples of these things. But we have a brand association that stands out to represent those things. And so we don't see anything outside of those things. We see everything else as being in a crowded room. We see that as being the big one in the room, and everything else is smaller compared to it. Because when we think about a Starbucks coffee, we're not thinking about just what we're consuming. We're thinking about the experience. We're thinking about how they always say they want to talk to you while you're waiting for your coffee. We think about the smell in the store. We think about the nice comfy couch. It was designed that way. So they call the third place. You heard that before? So the idea is that you have your home, you have your work, now you need this third place. That was what they were trying to design with Starbucks. And they went as far as, and McDonald's has done the same thing with their French fries as what Starbucks does with their coffee. They want to make sure that the experience is identical no matter where you are in the world. So they pre-process their fries so they taste exactly the same wherever you are in the world once they stick it in the fryer. Same thing with coffee beans. So if you ever notice that the coffee is really, really sweet, like everything is super sweet, and then it has this tartness at the back taste, the reason why is because they cover up the fact that they burn their beans. And the reason why they burn them is that way the flavor, I forget what it's called. Profile, thank you. The flavor profile is the same because once it's burnt, it's burnt. They now introduce blonde, but blonde is a different story. Anyway, what they then do is pack full with a sugar and all kinds of different flavors of sugar to cover up on that flavor. But the reason why they do it burnt, so that way, if they got their beans from Colombia or they got their beans from Kansas, it still tastes the same. And that's the reason why. Consistency. And then using the experience on top of it, that's part of it. So in my years, I used to work for Virgin. And there's a quote from Richard Branson. Does anybody know who Richard Branson is? Virgin. Does anybody know about Virgin? I feel so bad. There's only 2 of you now. 3. Okay. So I'm going to read you this quote. I've never been particularly good at numbers, but I think I've done a reasonable job with feelings. I'm convinced that it's feelings and feelings alone that account for the success of the Virgin brand and its myriad of forms. So I lived in London. Virgin was the #2 recognized brand in the UK, outside of, I think, Coca-Cola, and then Virgin, then the Queen. Virgin had Virgin Trains, Virgin Mobile, Virgin Radio, my favorite, Virgin Bride. They also had resorts, obviously the airline, etc. They all had the same things in common for how they represented the brand. And that was this playful, tongue-in-cheek, customer-first, sleek kind of approach to everything they did. So I used to work for Virgin Travel, and Virgin Travel was the overarching brand that had all the different Virgin travel brands that sat inside of it. So that was their resorts, their airlines, their package holidays, and then they had local airlines, like they used to have Virgin America before it got bought by Alaska. So anyway, when I was there, we had this big event because they got, so Richard Branson got, I think, 2.5 years exclusivity to this new Airbus that no other airline had access to for 2.5 years. And it had this, like, it was a super luxury line jumbo jet that was for their transatlantic flights. And it had like seats that went perfectly horizontal for you to sleep on. It had a bar, it had a second floor, it had like a masseuse station. I mean, it was nuts what this thing had. And when they first had their first Virgin flight on the for it, they had a big press event at Heathrow Airport. And so my job was to run the social media feed for the event. So I had, on the tarmac, we had champagne and appetizers for all the press. And Richard Branson shows up in this stretch limo. And then leggy stewardess after leggy stewardess comes out in these beautiful outfits. And then they surround Richard Branson. And then they invite everybody onto the plane. They all go on the plane. They fly around the circle, in a circle around the London area, and they eat nice food and have a band. I can't remember who it was anymore. That was like some stupid pop band when they landed, and then done. 2.5 hours. So at the end, Richard Branson was still there, wanted to thank people that were working on making it so successful and closing stuff out with some deals, blah, blah, blah. And then everyone was gone except maybe me and 4 other people and Richard Branson. He then thanks us all and leaves. Not in the limo with the leggy girls, but an SUV with his wife and his 2 kids waiting, and gave him a big hug, and they off they go in the SUV, because the brand Richard Branson and Virgin is different than Richard Branson. And so when he understood 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, he meant it. And so and that meant that it had to be in everything we did and do. Amazon tries to do a similar thing. So a different story. We had a Virgin Sweet 16 party. So on the 16th anniversary of Virgin Atlantic, there was a concert. And at the concert, there was like 3 bands that were on the Virgin Records label. And they invited everybody that worked in the London offices, wherever you were, for whatever one of the Virgin brands, you were allowed to come. And the interesting thing was there was 2 lines to go into this concert. One was moving at a relatively regular pace. The other one was much longer and much slower. That line, if you waited for the 40 minutes, at the very end, before you went in, was Richard Branson thanking you for being there as part of how he got to the 16th anniversary, hoping you had a great time, appreciating that you were part of that vision coming to life. Well, guess what that does to an employee? They start to live it too. So now that 1 + 1 + 3 equals 3, we just added another fan. So I'm going to be living the same brand promise because of that. So it's not just what you present, it's following through. Make sense? There's a problem when you don't. So does anyone know what happened after the election in 2016 with Facebook? Yes. Yes. So what exactly happened with Cambridge Analytica? Okay, so what Cambridge Analytica did was they captured user data and harvested it, which means that they then applied other data from other sources into that data and then created profiles based on who you were. And so based on that profile, if you were pro Hillary Clinton, or you were pro Donald Trump, or you were something in between, based on what it decided about your demographic, your interest in one, they would feed different advertising that was designed to undermine whatever it was that you were for or against. So they would reinforce lies on the Trump side to make you angry, and they would reinforce lies if you were a Clinton supporter to make you less enthused about showing up at the polls. This blew up shortly after the election, like 2017, 2018. Because Facebook did nothing to protect their users. Because it turned out they knew what Cambridge Analytica was doing. They thought it was fascinating. So what happened is that I happened to be interviewing with Facebook exactly when this was going down. And when the news broke about Cambridge Analytica and how it had an impact on the election and that Russian advertising was somehow involved, blah, blah, blah. I was in the middle of interviewing and it went quiet after the story broke. And then all of a sudden they showed up maybe 3 weeks later and said, hey, just want to know, we had to sit down as a team. So we put all of our roles on freeze, but now they're back up. And so we just want to know your interest in if everything's okay. And I was like, you break things, you learn, it's fine. I get it. I'm still in. Then this humanoid showed up in front of Congress. And he was acting like everything was new to him. And you could just tell that he was lying. And you could just tell he was just feeding nouns and verbs to get through Congress. 66% loss in customer trust that day. 15% drop in activity, 120 billion in valuation lost, all within a week. They also lost Jason Levine as candidate. I stepped out once he went in front of Congress. And that's because integrity is part of brand. Now, mind you, Trump is a really interesting example that his brand is to be in your face without integrity, which means that anything that comes his way bounces off of him because it's part of his brand is to be in your face about it. So what? And he literally said, so what? But so what? And people embrace that in his brand. And so everybody can live this except a very narrow audience that can get away without integrity. That's because all these things are wrapped together. So when we talk about Apple, we're not talking about a logo. We're not talking about a tagline. We're not talking about a product. We're talking about how these things all build a relationship, and that the reinforcement, the pattern recognition, the repetition of these values over and over and over again makes you have that association. So when I first started teaching here, there were 4 other Macs in my class. Is that a Mac? Yeah? Okay, that is a Mac. One not Mac right there. 1, 2. Okay. Why do you all have something that is literally triple the price? Why? You're students. You're eating top ramen. What are you doing? Explain. Why do you have a Mac? Yes. Uh-huh.
The reason I'm like a very loyal Apple user, I have iPhone, like I just have used them in my life, and I thought the product lasts long, so I just, yeah, I have random material.
Quality and aesthetic. So for you, the weight and then the consistency. Okay. Anyone else? Yes. It's designed as a system. Right. So it gets you into it. So that was part of like, so Jobs started with the computer, worked backwards to the iPod, then came to the phone, which then led to entry into the computer again. It's all an ecosystem. Then the iPad helped wrap it all up together. That's because a brand experience creates a positive, you like this, Rose? An emotional connectivity between you as the customer and what you're selling. See, I told you could teach this class. Okay, so here's an interesting study. Whether you're a Mac person or a PC person, even the briefest exposure to the Apple logo may make you behave more creatively, according to a recent, now mind you, this is a 10-year-old study, but a research study from Duke University. Okay, so check this out. This will break your brain.
Certain brands are associated with different personality traits. So for instance, the Apple brand has really cultivated.
You probably can't hear that very well, can you? Okay, let me see if I can fix audio. Oh, sorry. Okay, that's connected. That is connected. This is not connected. Yeah, there we go. Jabra. Okay, now we should be able to hear it better.
Certain brands are associated with different personality traits. So for instance, the Apple brand has really cultivated an image of creativity and innovativeness. And so we thought that being exposed to the Apple brand might lead individuals to become more creative or to have a goal to be more creative.
Participants come into the lab and we tell them they're going to be participating in a visual acuity test. And the way this works is that a box will either pop up on the left or the right of the screen. And their task is to say left or right when the box pops up. In addition, to sort of further complicate the task and ensure that they don't catch any glimpse of a logo, for example, we have them keep a running tab of the sum of the numbers in the middle of the screen. They think all they're seeing is the box coming up on the left and the number appearing. What they're actually seeing is a box come up, the box disappears for a very, very short duration, like 30 milliseconds, a brand logo pops up, the logo goes away, and the box appears. What the person's conscious perception is that a box has popped up and gone away, and that's it. They don't realize that they've been exposed to the brand logo.
What we found is that people who were subliminally primed with the Apple logo actually had a goal to be creative, activated by this exposure, and they were more creative on a later task. So we asked them to come up with uses for a brick, come up with as many different unusual uses for a brick that they could think of. And what we found is that people who had been subliminally primed to the Apple logo were more creative than people who had been subliminally primed to the IBM logo.
I hope that freaks you out. It's all interrelated. The reinforcement, the repetition, the patterns, the emotional connection, it's all designed to operate together. So that way, when you want to buy, you already have these connections in place for it to be a positive embracing of what that means. So one of the things that's going to be really interesting is that I joke with my kids all the time about it being a Temu experience versus a good experience. Like, how many times are you going to get Temu'd when you buy stuff and it ends up falling apart, ends up being smaller than what you thought, ends up not working right, it ends up only working for X number of days before you need something replaced, it ends up taking too many days. All these things undermine a brand until that becomes how you associate the brand, which is why you always are cultivating that brand to reinforce it. And those reinforcements are how we use our pattern skills that are now adopted for how we positively associate with things. Make sense? Okay.
Certain brands.
So brand is a perception in the mind of your customer that is relevant with who you are and what you do. That consistency is how it is framed. So I'm going to go through some examples as fast as I can. We've got about 45 minutes. So this one is for Santander. Does anybody know who Santander is? So they are a Spanish bank, and they had introduced, were wanting to introduce an online-only bank in Germany. Mind you, they were a bank from Spain. So I'm going to show you what the Spanish version looked like. And what they wanted was essentially to have an online version of this bank be in Germany. Well, when they hired me, first thing I did was look at the existing websites of banks in Germany. This is what they look like. Are you noticing any themes here? Yes. A very visible presence of what? A physical location, a building, a big building. And these all have names like People's Bank, Bank of Germany, like names like that. So why would it be that they don't look like essentially Walmart as their brand, but instead look like this? Well, all you got to do is go back in time. So this quote, "Money is a creature of the law. A theory of money must therefore deal with legal history." This was by George Knapp, who was a German economist of the 50s. Now, reason why he was saying that was because of what happened to lead to World War II due to hyperinflation. Hyperinflation occurred because of the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. Does anybody know about the Treaty of Versailles? Go for it, Jacob.
Treaty after World War I that really punished Germany and led to a lot of inflation in Germany because they had to pay a ton of money to allied powers. And so they just printed a bunch of money.
Yes. Yes. So to summarize, in order to pay reparations for beginning World War I, Germany was responsible for paying back the costs to the winning Allied forces for their costs by making them pay it back. And what they did to pay that back was by printing money, which led to hyperinflation. So it was cheaper to burn your cash as fire than it was to buy wood with that money. Hyperinflation destroyed the economy, which is exactly what led to World War II. So there are some very, very, very deep-seated fears about how well you can hold on to your money in Germany. So they are negatively influenced by their history of autocratic rule and hyperinflation. The result in banking has been large institutional corporate banks and credit unions rather than retail. Well, what happened in that led to Spain having its Discount-O-Rama brand? Well, they also had an autocratic rule. So when that ended, what people ended up doing was not putting their money in the banks because it was seized during the same period of World War II. So what they did was they put all their cash under their beds, literally. And then when they switched to the euro, what they had to do was convert their cash into a bank to get euros. Or after a certain period of time, I think it was like 2002, their money would be worth nothing. So they had to put it into the bank. But here's the thing, they were siphoning tons of cash. It was a cash economy because they were avoiding banks. They didn't want to have to deal with paying taxes on it. So what they did was they tried to incentivize people to use that cash. Well, what did they do? Lower interest rates so they could invest in property. So everyone was competing with interest rates and banks for your cash, which is why you see an entirely different approach for how Spain represents their banks versus Germany. That context is baked in. You can't avoid it. So you have to then work around those as the limitations. So the solution I came up with was to essentially say, we're not going to be able to attract anyone buying online for an online bank if you were born prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall. Well, actually, sorry, not born, but don't remember the fall of the Berlin Wall. If you remember it, odds are you also remember a lot of other bad things about autocratic rule, and you want nothing to do with some crazy idea of an online bank. So therefore, the design of this was for a very narrow German audience. And that was how we solved for it. The brand, the design, the message, the aesthetic, all spoke to everyone else that didn't fit that profile of having a scar left behind due to autocratic rule. Make sense? And that's because these brand perceptions are built into everything. And they all try to live in those worlds. And so they all have these associations that we attach to them. So creator, ruler, caregiver, these are all terms that we use to be able to then attach for how we then represent those brands. And you can fit anywhere you want on that scale, as long as you are living up for it. So I'm not expecting an M&M to be an awesome chocolate, but its consistency of that expectation, it's going to be cheap and it's not going to give me dysentery. Well, that's a pretty good combo for chocolate. Every now and then I'll want Lindt. I will eat it slower. I will pay more. They all have their place where they fit in this association. Cars work the same way. And it's interesting because I'm at Amazon, in the role I'm playing, part of what I oversee is the automotive connected car space. And the way Toyota is using and Honda are using us for our technologies that we're offering to their services is very different than BMW or Mercedes or Volvo. Because what Toyota is selling is reliability. And since reliability is number one, that means it doesn't need to be cutting edge. It needs to be reliable. So what you'll see on a Toyota is generally 3 to 5 years behind what you'll see on a BMW. Because BMW is selling you bleeding edge technology. Now, what comes with that bleeding edge technology? It can be a little iffy. But you're buying a BMW for it. The ultimate driving machine. It's built right into their logo. Make sense? So you can base these things to be able to understand how brands are then ranked by their recognizability and their association. This also works with stylistically how we approach these things. So here you're seeing a whole bunch of tourism boards, the country of different countries and cities. What do you notice about these brands? What is the style that kind of slips out looking at these? They're colorful. Why would that be? What do multiple colors represent? Interesting, fun, variety. What about the fonts? Fun. Yes, they're playful. All of these fonts are playful in their styling. All of the logos are playful, and they all have a handwritten piece to them to make them feel personalized. They all have color to represent variety. These are some of my favorites because my all-time favorite designer is Peter Saville, which did the logo for Manchester, the city of Manchester. He did this entire system that was absolutely magnificent. Peter Saville did all this amazing artwork and graphic arts for record labels as well. But these just happen to be very beautiful ones because they evoke not only a sophisticated message while all staying within the same kind of travel-ish kind of place, but they also give you kind of a vocation of what they mean as like a presence as a brand to the city. Hong Kong feels progressive, yet tied to its history. Sounds about a good way to describe Hong Kong, right? Bahamas, it looks like a chain of islands. They all look beautiful and different and modern. Get the idea? Like all these things are built into those emotional ties we described. These are all metro services across the world. What do you see as the similarities in these? An M, yep. It's just a symbol. What else? They're nearly all monotone, monochromatic, and they're either blue or red. Why? Because it's high contrast. They can be seen from a block away. They're all recognizable from the things around it. They serve a function. They don't want to tell you that riding on the London Underground is fun and exciting. It wants to tell you where to go to get into it. That's all. And that's because color is part of it. It takes the center stage in many brands, and it's a philosophy of design. Every color we see implies something either directly or indirectly, and that helps drive our perception of individual brands. Some colors go beyond their brands, defining entire industries, such as blue for finance industry, green for health, and red for fast food. We'll see some examples of that in a minute. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? I've been talking a whole lot. What does this have to do with a research class? That's what I'm waiting for somebody to ask me. Because if you don't understand the brand that you are doing research for, you don't understand your job. Because you need to make sure that your customer understands why they're there, and the brand is how you evoke it. That's why. The color system, the fonts, the message, that's how I communicate it. Oops. So the thing is that there are preferences based on what is the cultural associations. Yes, Wendy. Amazon is right. We'll get to that one. But what I would say is that the most important thing about the brand is that they are customer first. I will always have a personalized recommendation. I will always have a reliable best price. I will always have a no questions asked return policy. I will always have quick delivery. Those expectations are all thinking about the customer first. It may do 150 different things wrong, but it gets those 4 fundamentals right. And then you'll see how it plays out as a brand. But good question. So anyway, this, mind you, what we're looking at is for the European American style of preferences. It's different once you move into Asia or Africa or South America for that matter. But anyway, this kind of gives you how like those preferences are tied to gender as well. And we also have preferences of what we don't like. So purple being an example of something that men have a higher aversion to than women. Okay, so color theory. There is a reinforcement that we have with certain colors. So blue, secure, calm, honest, caring, strong, trustworthy. Red, energetic, love, exciting, action, passionate, bold. Orange, approachable, affordable, happy, friendly, sociable, easy. So you ask Wendy, that's what we try to do. If you see any of our Super Bowl ads, well, if you ever watch any of our Super Bowl ads, they're all trying to hit every one of these check marks. Yellow, logical, playful, optimistic, thinking, forward, confident. Now here's where it gets evil. Green, natural growth, organic, fresh, caring, earth. Does anybody know what that bottom right logo is? British Petroleum. What is BP specifically responsible for? Sorry? I thought I heard from Sony. They were drilling for oil, and what happened? The were close. It was in the Gulf of Mexico, mostly impacted Louisiana and some in Texas. It was the human history's worst man-made disaster ever. That includes Chernobyl in that list. BP was responsible for spilling billions of gallons of oil per day. But their logo is a beautiful green sunflower. Not a coincidence. Right before they did this logo, right before that happened. But it was the other way around. The BP part was bigger, the sunflower was smaller. Black, sophisticated, luxury, authority, formal, seductive, servicing. Sorry? Yes. Yeah, yeah. And the thing is that they will do different things with their logo. If you look at the BBC's logo for their news, it's red, not black. For their, when they advertise for their radio stations, now mind you, we don't live there, but those are always blue. So the design system has systems built into it. Yes.
I wonder like how do the high-end luxury brands they fit into the scheme of color theory, because like if I am looking at orange, I am reminded of say an Hermes bag, which is also orange, like the iconic color. But it is nowhere, approachable, affordable, friendly, social, or whatever.
Now, there's a difference between how it associates its product from how it associates its brand. So Hermes definitely does not have an orange logo. It has a gold logo, if I remember, or black. It's used one or the other. It's already reinforcing that. Prada's the same way. They have a lot of different colors they use as part of how they define themselves. But as far as the brand, like you walk in the store, there's a boldness to it in a very specific aesthetic. There's a couple that are very different from that. Like one of my former creative director, when I had my agency, he designed the Alexander McQueen logo. And that was his first client. And Alexander McQueen, for those that don't know, is a very avant-garde brand. Very avant-garde, just as expensive as all the other ones, but extremely avant-garde. And so even though its logo is designed to look prestigious, everything he does that has that logo on it is like crazy bold on purpose. Does that make sense? So it's weaving that together. So finding your point of view has to do with asking very common questions. Oops. I hate when I do these kind of slides. So you need to be able to think about how these things all associate with each other. I'm gonna have to go really fast because we have a lot to cover still, and I know I must be burning you guys out by now. You doing all right? Okay. So I'll do this fast. Care Oregon. They are the largest health insurance company in the state of Oregon. They were a client of mine, and they came to me to redo their website. And what I realized right from the very beginning, they didn't need me to redesign their website. They need me to redesign their brand, because this was their color palette, and this is what they had as photos, and this is what they did with it. This is the largest healthcare insurance provider in all of the state of Oregon. What does this say to you? I come here to die. That's what this says to you. And the design system was very functional in its purpose. What they were trying to do as a function was their brand system was based on a folder that the brochures were in. So the sales guy knew by looking at the color of the folder, which one to pick up based on who he was selling it to. And that was what the entire design system was. It was functional in its purpose, not evocative of any kind of need behind it. So we had to break it apart. So you can't really tell here, but what we first thing we did was we simplified the brand to being, oh God, these look terrible in this projector. But essentially it's a dark blue and a dark orange that then had lighter shades of it that were then used through the rest of the website. We then made the photography be much more celebratory of who and what Care Oregon cares for. So the thing about Care Oregon is they're very different than your average bear. They're nonprofit, first of all. And the second thing they do is try to solve for people at the place they are and then help them from where they are in their lives. So, for example, this is a real person or people that were Care Oregon customers. They were wanting to find out if they could get a write-off for their YMCA membership because they were going for swim lessons. And they were like, and Care Oregon was like, this is a brilliant idea. We're going to do this for everyone. And we're going to make it free. We're not going to give you a discount. You're going to live longer because of this. So they offered to anybody who was over the age of 70 for free. That is a real patient with her doctor. The reason why is that they realized that people live longer if your doctor does not change. So they made sure that they put into place ways, whether you moved or not, you still had access to the doctor who had the history with you. She happened to be autistic. And so her having that connection with her original doctor meant a lot to her trust and using of care. They all of a sudden on your 65th or 70th birthday, they would automatically ship you a bench to put in your shower so you wouldn't slip. And they just did all these crazy things that were just like thinking about the people. So the idea was to associate those positive messages, the colorfulness of what that meant as the type of people that they were supporting, and make that their brand instead. So their photography represented that. That was the idea. Mind you, this looks dated. This is 2017, 16. So I understand it doesn't look exactly modern anymore, but that was the brand as we did as a system. Lighter colors, easier messaging, more colorful, more positive. So that's the brand and color and photo, please. Now let's go back to how we lay this stuff out, the aesthetics behind how we lay these things out. This is also goes back to how your brain is operated. So there's this little part of your brain that you see right there, the yellow part. The medulla oblongata, I think is what it is, if I can remember right. You'll probably tell me I'm wrong when I go to the next slide. But what it does is it helps you be able to triangulate in your brain. Now, there's something really interesting on how things triangulate. It builds a grid. So I'm going to show you an example. What you're seeing here is that they mapped to, they added a little node on mice to track when the imbricata is being triggered. And because they understand it has something to do with spatial awareness. And so what they did was they put these mice into a box, and for multiple times they would put food in the exact same spot. And then they introduced something new into the environment. So what they did was they would introduce the mouse to the box, and it would start to trigger more as it went closer to the association of where it saw that food the last few times. Now what you see here is they introduced the same mouse into a longer box. And it's almost as if you stretched the image. It's triggering longer. Same thing when they introduced a fake wall. Same thing. It was triggering based on what it had as association of triangulation. Also works with fish, believe it or not. Okay, so we're going to watch a quick video.
We can also test where we think objects are, like this golf flag in simple environments, or indeed where your car would be. So we can have people explore an environment and see the location they have to remember. And then if we put them back in the environment, generally they're quite good at putting a marker down where they thought that flag or their car was. But on some trials, we could change the shape and size of the environment like we did with the place cell. In that case, we can see how where they think the flag had been changes as a function of how you change the shape and size of the environment. And what you see, for example, if the flag was where that cross was in a small square environment, and then you ask people to say where it was, but you've made the environment bigger, where they think the flag had been stretches out in exactly the same way that the place cell firing pattern stretched out. It's as if you remember where the flag was by storing the pattern of firing across all of your place cells at that location, and then you can get back to that location by moving around so that you best match the current pattern of firing of your place cells with that stored pattern. That guides you back to the location that you want to remember.
Wait, what'd I do? Keep going.
We can also test.
Oh, okay. Sorry, that is the end of the video. So, in other words, your brain is already looking for associations for things by using this part of your brain to identify the trigger points. And so what it does is it uses the positioning and size as that orientation. Make sense? Mind you, it is used for when you were in the savannah, your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparent. So we use all these things in conjunction with each other when we're looking at websites. So size, position, and contrast all play into each other. So now you're going back in time to 2003. This was when I worked at Virgin, so I understand it looks very dated. But the laws of using size, contrast, and position still apply. So what you see here is the Virgin Travel Store, which was our package holiday site. And it also allowed you to be able to search for flights, whether or not they were on Virgin. And there are different things that are happening on the site. We had all these requirements of what we needed to present. So my favorite thing is that is a animated GIF of the girl in her bikini, and then she actually wiggled her tush, and she would show her tan line when she would wiggle her tush. You can get away with that in England, you can't get away with that here. So there are different things that we have for that consistency. The red on the left was allowing for some of that consistency to play a part. So that way, this showed being primary, that showed being secondary. I used its position and its size to draw your eye into what is the most important thing to do. This is in a less focal point of the page, so I made it larger to give it balance. Make sense? Contrast allowed this area to stand out despite the fact that this guy is bigger. So you use these things as a system together. Now, mind you, this was for the retail site. We also had one that was for a wholesale site that was designed for travel agents. So that site looked like this, but it used exactly the same logic, just it was a more subdued color palette. Make sense? Any questions so far? This is a quick and dirty site to demonstrate how that all applies. So here, position, size, and contrast to tell you what it is, what it does, and how to do it. Contrast because it's somewhere really small, and I mean it's low on the page to give it contrast from the things around it. It is shown larger with a higher contrast. The position, this is the primary position where you look for things. That was in the left. And then the contrast of making sure all images were colorful and on a white background, and the position of where you would go to be able to navigate, for being able to filter, that was all built into this design system to make it super simple, just so I can give you some examples of how this works. You with me so far? All good? Okay. So here's a better example with Airbnb. What you see here is the map with their examples. And if we zoom in, you can see that there is a really nice balance between all those things. Because what's the most important thing? Not the price, but the photo. The only other thing that pops out is the price after the photo. Mind you, now we're at Travel Zoo. You ever been to Travel Zoo? They have a different approach. The biggest thing, the first thing it's showing you is the price. The contrast is telling you this is important. And then the photos to the right. Because what you're looking at first is how much I can save. So its design system is built in a different operational priority because of that. Airbnb knows that they've got you once you're there. It's just a matter of when you finally hit book. Travel Zoo has a different problem. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to show you an example. This is A+, which was a nonprofit that I used to do work for. So A+ was a youth program that provided free, no, was it free? No, it was not free, it was membership. It provided tutoring and guidance counselors for students that were trying to go through sports to gain a scholarship. Now, the problem that most students have that are going that route is that they are being pushed really hard for their athletics, and no one really cares about their performance with their education. Well, what that ends up leading to is eventually only 0.01% of those people lead to a professional job. The other 99.9 are being undereducated despite how much effort they put in to get in the door. So the idea behind this program was to make sure you came with all the tools necessary to excel by giving you the training you needed for your mind, as well as for performing in the sport. And they did like 4 or 5 different sports that they focused on. Make sense so far? So this was a nonprofit, so we had to do this on the side. It was all pro bono. And so I'm going to show you an example of what the website that I gave my intern to do. Okay, hide this dumb thing. Hide. There we go. Okay. So let's go to here. All right. So this is an intern. And this was the website that he designed. This was after 3 or 4 attempts at trying to get him to improve the design approach. Okay. Anybody want to tell me what they think about this website? It's okay. He's moved on. He's now a senior designer doing really well. He learned his lesson. What does this website tell you about the brand, about the experience, about the trust level? Yes, Rose. I'm sorry, the hierarchy in the imagery is what? There's no athletics. It's talking about athletics, but then it's a smiling lady. Okay. Yeah, that's part of the problem. What else? It's very busy, even though there's a logo of the city. There's weird amorphous floating head. Then there's the other weird amorphous floating head over the cityscape. Then there's 2 different things. Mind you, 80% of this page is white space. Yet it's still exceptionally busy. Yes, what else? Yes. The contrast makes it impossible to read the text. Now, mind you, their logo is purple and white. So he was trying to pull up on the purpleness of the logo. Anything else? Yeah, at the time, now mind you, This was in 2014. So this was really the aesthetic at the time. Mind you, the aesthetic was taken to like volume 400 on making it oversized, but yeah. So what about the tone? How does this feel as far as the tone? What would you think to yourself if you were a potential student looking to excel in your sport? What would you think going to this site? Or the parent? Sure. That is true. It was, I believe, around 80% were because they purposely had their locations in like Rainier Beach specifically to help kids that wouldn't be able to excel otherwise. So it was on purpose.
Like to see the machine vision or like this, and then like the upcoming events as a fluid.
Yes. So tell me what it is you're here for. What is it this place does? So you're exactly right. All those things that you mentioned are all exactly correct. So I worked with this poor guy trying to help guide him for about a week and a half. And it was just more versions of this. So we were presenting the next morning. And this was the final version of what he sent to me at, I don't know, like 9:00 p.m. So put the kids to bed, and from 10:30 p.m. till about 4 in the morning, I redesigned everything. So mind you, I'm still confined with the same constraints of what there is for content, what there is for the page layout as far as the system for content that would appear, and I have the same photography. But this is what I came up with. So first is making sure that you had a very clear understanding of who this is for and what it was for. The second was to brighten the colors. The third was to use a color system where we needed the imagery to show up, it had a translucent, opaque field that went over the photo. And that way, the photo wasn't competing with the message. This is that same image, but brighter and a little clearer by making it so that the left side with the text was easier and clearer to read. The photo showed more of a relationship between the people versus it being just a background image. Now, this is one of the ones I wanted to show you, is this one. So I needed to reinforce the brand. So what you see here is this adorable girl working on her homework. And why isn't it showing auto select layer? Why aren't I seeing the layer select? That's that layer. Here we go. I changed the color so it mapped to the system. Change color here so it mapped to the system. Just subtle things. It allows it so that it operates as an entire system instead of it being independent things that are competing. By simply using the same brand color, all of a sudden, the competition with the noise of everything else is reduced. I would have loved to have spent more time on the content strategy. There's only so many hours between 10:30 and 4, so please forgive me. But the idea was to make something that aesthetically met the bar of the brand. And so by simplifying, using the same system over and over again for how things were laid out, like if you look at translucent bar of text This is the exact same size as the one over here, except it's now the reverse. Make sense? Same proportions, same model, simplified. Simple, simple, simple.